Welcome to ArchLadder. Today we are going to explore complexity and contradiction in architecture by Lobo Bentuli. In 1966, amid the high tide of orthodox modern architecture, an American architect, Lobo Bentuli, published a book that will quietly yet fundamentally shift the course of design history. In this video, we will cover 3 topics. 1. About the author, Lobo Bentuli. And 2. About the book. And 3. Key takeaways from the book. Now let's get a break with coffee and enjoy this video until the end. 1. About Lobo Bentuli. Before we unpack the book, we need to understand the man behind the manifesto. Lobo Charles Bentuli, born in 1925 in Philadelphia, whose early life and training laid the groundwork for his revolutionary ideas. Bentuli started his formal education at Princeton University, which instilled in him a deep appreciation for architectural history, a subject many of his modernist contemporaries choose to dismiss. Crucially, his postgraduate time as a Rome Prize Fellow in the mid-1950s was totally transformative. Living among the layered and visually complex architecture of the ancient city, from its ruins to its Baroque masterpieces, Bentuli began to formulate his critique of modernism's rigid simplicity. He later taught at the University of Pennsylvania, working alongside architects like Louis Kahn, whose rigorous intellectual approach clearly influenced the Bentuli's own. The first significant physical draft of the book's arguments was his commission of his mother, the Vanna Bentuli House, built between 1962 and 1964, which was a calculated affront to the prevailing stark minimalism of the era. In the 1960s, he formed the architectural firm that would eventually become Bentuli Scott Brown and Associates, with his partner and the intellectual collaborator Dennis Scott Brown, who was instrumental in developing their theories and extending their arguments into urbanism. Ultimately, Bentuli and Scott Brown were not merely critics. They were active pioneers who found beauty in the complexity where others saw only banality. 2. About the book. Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture was published in 1966 under the Museum of Modern Art's Papers on Architecture series, intended not as how-to guide but as profound philosophical challenge. The core thesis is very simple. Modern architecture had become too narrow, too focused on purity, clarity, and simplicity, often at the expense of richness and meaning, leading Bentuli to argue that architecture must instead embrace the inherent complexity and contradiction of existence. Famously, the book serves as a direct, pointed response to the modernist slogan, "Less is more," coined by Mies van der Rohe, with Bentuli positing the simple exclusion of difficult elements leads only to an uneasy unity that is ultimately boring and disconnected from the human condition, coining his own maxim, "Less is a bore." In the second chapter, Complexity and Contradiction versus Simplification or Picturesqueness. What makes the book so powerful is its rigorous use of historical evidence, as Bentuli uses over 350 photographs of buildings spanning from ancient Rome to 20th century Europe, pointing specifically to works by masters like Michelangelo, Palladio, and Lucians, analyzing how they deliberately used ambiguity, distortion, and paradox to achieve a deeper, more dynamic unity. Regarding to the structure of the book, the full table of contents moves systematically, starting with introductory arguments, and then using various conceptual lenses to re-examine architectural history. The chapters cover ideas like ambiguity, contradiction, the inside and the outside, and the obligation toward the difficult whole. Because the book is so rich, we are going to focus on three essential concepts: the both and, the double functioning, the obligation toward the difficult whole. 3. Key takeaways. Now we jump onto the key takeaways and begin with the summary of the both and concept. This both and concept is one of the fundamental ideas of Bentuli's philosophy, which stands in direct opposition to modernism's insistence on the either or. He argues that truly vital architecture must acknowledge and integrate multiple and even contradictory meanings and functions simultaneously. This results in ambiguity, which Bentuli celebrates as a source of architectural richness, meaning that a single element should be capable of conveying different things to different people, or even opposing ideas to the same person at the same time. This is achieved through contradictory levels, where the simple overall form of a building can contain complex, layered meanings up close, preventing the architecture from communicating a single, simple, and therefore boring message. This is perfectly exemplified by his own Bonaventure house, where the apparently symmetrical front facade is actually highly asymmetrical, and central split gable is simultaneously conventional and strangely unsettling, confusing the leading of its parts, but perhaps it still keeps the building looking stable. The next key takeaway is the double functioning element. Expanding on the both and idea, Bentuli explains how this complexity is realized through the double functioning element, where a single component of a building performs two or more roles that are often in tension with each other, thus avoiding the rigid separation of parts favored by earlier architects. In this approach, a structure might also define a space or become the expressive ornament, deliberately blurring traditional categories, so that a wall is simultaneously a load-bearing element and a symbolic sign. This tension is most evident in the building's facade, which has a difficult dual role. It must accommodate the functional and pragmatic demands of the interior and the aesthetic and contextual requirements of the exterior urban environment. This difficult relationship between the inside and the outside is an inherent contradiction that must be in place, not eliminated. The last key takeaway is the obligation toward the difficult whole. This final climactic concept synthesizes all of Bentuli's arguments, symbolizing the ultimate goal of his architecture: achieving unity not through exclusion, but through integration. Bentuli calls for the difficult whole, which stands in sharp contrast to the easy unity through exclusion practiced by modernists, who simply stripe away the parts they deem difficult or messy. The difficult whole demands that the architect include all the complexity, contradiction, heterogeneous forces, and often ugly reality on the side, the program and the tradition into a final, coherent, but intellectually rich totality. This perspective requires accepting that the urban world is messy, complicated, and often banal, and that the very architecture must reflect this by synthesizing the ordinary and the sophisticated. Bentulli finds his greatest precedent in the Baroque masters, particularly in works like Michelangelo's Porta in Rome, which is a masterful demonstration of contradiction. It is fragmented, layered, and mixes elements from different architectural vocabularies. Yet through these conflicts, it achieves a profound and dynamic overall unity. In closing, complexity and contradiction in architecture gave architects the intellectual permission they desperately needed to look beyond the rigid, puritanical rules of orthodox modernism. This was more than just a critical book, it was a liberating act. Bentulli's Gentle Manifesto taught us 3 essential lessons. First, that architecture must be non-straightforward, embracing the both-and phenomena, a call for ambiguity and multiple meanings over simple clarity. Second, the design thrives when it uses double-functioning elements that acknowledge and mediate the difficult tension between the building's inside and its outside, integrating structure, space, and symbolism. And finally, that the highest architectural achievement is the obligation toward the difficult whole, where unity is found not through stripping away complexity, but by synthesizing all the messy, contradictory, and vital forces of human life and history. The influence of this book is undeniable. It single-handed provided the critical foundation for the postmodern movement in architecture permanently, changed how we value history, context, and ordinary in our built environment. It remains a powerful reminder that perhaps the richest, most meaningful architecture, the one that dares to embrace the full, contradictory mass life itself. Thanks for watching ArchLadder. We've reviewed this book and we hope you will have the opportunity to read the actual text and learn more about it. And still, we're just halfway up the ladder of the knowledge of all of the architecture, art, and design. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.